The term minimalism is said to have been coined in 1965 in relation to the bare, concrete, metal, and clean-cut art popularized at the time. This aesthetic would later seep into lifestyle and fashion, which is mostly what we're going to be referencing today. Outside the art world, the mid-60s and 70s were generally a period of unrest and uncertainty for most people, and the same can be said for the late 2000s with the 2008 economic crisis and last year and now. But what do all these time periods have in common? The spikes in the popularity of minimalism as a trend. A lifestyle that requires necessity and leaves no room for financial devastation, but gives financial and lifestyle freedom. A select few in the United States enjoyed the fruits of peace and prosperity after World War II, with the majority of Americans still living in poverty and fighting for basic human rights. But there was another select group fighting against the grandiose consumerism pushed on white America. In the 1970s, the idea of freedom and fighting the power really grew, along with the idea of living a voluntarily simplistic lifestyle that prioritized mobility and simplicity, especially in the quote-unquote hippie movement of the time, even though the visuals and clothing aesthetics may not necessarily be what we associate with minimalism today. In the late 90s, the financial independence, retire early, or FIRE movement really picked up speed, where people wanted to work hard, save as much money as they could, and retire before the age of 40 so they could actually live life. And I think this is another sort of branch of minimalism because of how it, again, emphasized a very simple lifestyle, only spending what you need and making sure every single dollar that you make works for you. Every single one. No spicy avocado toast or Starbucks. And for those unfamiliar with the 2008 economic crisis, in the US, this left many people unemployed, unhoused, and yet again more people were looking for freedom. And this time there was a special ingredient in the mix, our good old friends in the self-help industry. One such self-help sort of brand that specifically focuses on minimalism is the Minimalists, a company started by two bros being dudes in black t-shirts that's often cited as the sort of spark for the popularity of minimalism in the 2010s and now. They have books, a podcast, 2 Netflix shows, YouTube videos, a Patreon, you name it, all in the name of spreading the gospel of ridding yourself of life's excess in favor of focusing on what's important so you can find happiness, fulfillment, and freedom. The Minimalists have an interesting short article on their website, which I think is a very good segue here, called "Is Minimalism Just for Single Rich White Guys?" I also just realized that in this article they reference Jesus, and I'm just thinking, first of all, I hardly think anyone would say Jesus' life was simple, and second of all, I love when people always cite Jesus and being like, oh yeah, you need to not worry about material things. And it's like, okay, let's talk about your wallet. Where are you doing the wealth distribution? Come on now. My interpretation of that article is that there are fewer obstacles for the poor to practice minimalism because when resources are limited, one has to be intentional about how they spend, which begs the question, is minimalism just a way for the privileged to step into a way of life that those with meager resources already practice anyway? Is it a way for privileged people to feel good about themselves because they're not as gaudy and excessive as the typical capitalist? Because even in the early examples of minimalism, the artists, the hippies with one backpack, the people who have the ability to save most of their paycheck, this movement is founded upon privilege. For a practice that pats itself on the back for being mindful and self-aware and reflective, I rarely see that sort of stuff being addressed. The key cornerstones of minimalism, freedom, happiness, fulfillment, have never been equally distributed to all of us. I know a lot of my questions and thoughts can easily be answered by something like, well, minimalism is customizable, it looks different for different people, but that's exactly the problem. Over many years, minimalism has looked like everything from appropriating religious practices and cultures, neo-colonialists settling in exotic places and finding peace, to corporations ruining their logos, greenwashing, and industrial-looking aesthetics that are different from the fun and colorful of yesteryear. It's spiraled out of control and led to the guilt of the average consumer for the number of belongings they hold, when the more important hoarding we should be questioning is in millionaire wallets. At this point, you're probably wondering what any of this has to do with you. You're not a minimalist. you don't associate with any minimalists, so this is none of your business. But have you ever thought about the so-called excess that has been taken away from you without your knowledge? Minimalism has been endorsed by governments and corporations and ingrained further and further into everyone's lifestyles. More and more people are paying higher rents for smaller spaces. Our daily activities are limited to work and some play if we're lucky. Even now, as we're all advocating for working from home because of greater sense of freedom it has given people in the past year, more and more employers are encouraging their workers to work more hours in the day because you have free time now. And the majority of the comments I see on minimalism videos are about people wanting to know how to maximize their time, to make the most of it, as if there's some sort of a rat race to the top of who can make the most of their 24 hours a day. This can be confirmed by posts that are like, you and Beyonce have the same 24 hours in the day. Do better. And the idolization of the scant wardrobes of billionaire tech bros. We all wear the same similar clothing manufactured in the same places, trends shoveled into our face that this is what we're supposed to wear, and anyone who deviates even slightly is shunned, be it in the form of not being given a job or just being labeled a social pariah.
Name a capitalist scam that we've all been conditioned to believe is totally okay.
Minimalism. Oh my god, minimalism. Remember when houses used to look like this? Probably not. Because we've been conditioned to believe the most ideal form of design looks more like this. All the time in the design world, minimalism is upheld as the gold standard. It's pushed almost as a spiritual form of lifestyle. Netflix even made this documentary, Minimalism, and documentary about the important things. However, complex ornamental design was a deep and significant part of human culture since the dawn of humans. Basically, since people started clothing themselves. It was until about 1931, when Adolf Loos, an Austrian architect, wrote Ornament and Crime. He compares excessive ornamentation to being something that's criminal and inhuman. You can pause here to read it. It's really bad. This is him, by the way. Ugh. Problem is, this essay became a seminal text in many architecture circles. There's a lot of really good minimal design out there. It's based on a history of cultural erasure and fascism. And I don't know, I just wish more of the world looked like this.
Also, on that note, I've said this before, but white people should be just as upset as anyone about the homogenization of cultures under the name of white supremacy. Because white supremacy only exists and thrives if it's able to grow. And the way it has historically done that is by homogenizing cultures into some vague sense of whiteness. There are a lot of unique cultures that originate from light-skinned people. But a lot of white people today can't even really connect with that heritage because somewhere along the way they were absorbed into this all-encompassing sense of whiteness. The definition of which had to keep on expanding in order to stay powerful.
The Western world has done a good job of creating homogeny across the world. Everyone has a casual, formal, or event uniform, and wherever you go in the world, our fashion has been shaped by the US, the UK, France, etc., all the big Western powers. Our knowledge of traditional and cultural dress is limited to the stuff that remained preserved after years of colonialism. You know, you get the gist. I feel like everything bad just always boils down to the big C. I do understand what the minimalist movement tries to do for us at the end of the day. It wants to present a solution to the overwhelming, sometimes soul-crushing reality of this system, but it completely ignores the fact that it is a direct benefactor. Because in reality, how many families can afford to pack it all up and live in a tiny home, travel, live out of a backpack without consequence? A lot of people also resent how individualistic the self-improvement part of this minimalism movement and aesthetic is, because I feel like minimalism would be more productive if it spent time actually unpacking all the things that have led to the mass consumerism and unhappiness in the Western world and finding solutions rather than just guilting people about those choices. Because are you really an advocate for freedom when your movement seems to think it operates in a vacuum? I saw a tweet some time ago where someone was like, we have been bombarded with suggestions of self-help and helping yourself throughout the year and throughout this panoramic, and it's like, when are we going to finally realize that at some point you can only help yourself to a certain degree? At some point you really need to address the bigger things that have caused you to get to your point of seeking out these sorts of things. But because of, again, the cool visuals and the aesthetic and the often hot people who talk about these things on the internet, loads of people will flock to them and will flock to this idea of, I can just get rid of these things and therefore my life will be perfect. But unless you really get down to the crux of what is actually causing you harm, you can't, unless you're already at a certain point of privilege. So that's my rant for the day. If you have gotten to this point in the video, comment, she put problematic in the title for clickbait, because I did. Thank you for watching. I hope you've somehow enjoyed this video, and I guess I'll see you next time. Okay, bye. I just had to clarify what was so funny, because I spent like 20 minutes yelling at my phone and at my microphone, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, this video is over now, goodbye, and I have to be smiling and nice, and it's so weird.